From China, and please introduce yourself and the floor is yours.
All right. Okay. My name is Dabao Guan. I work for still in England, University of East Anglia, but also I'm a chair in the Tsinghua University in China. So I'm gonna talk about climate change and international trade mostly. But before that, I just want to have a little sort of advertisement about the database we created, we developed over the last number of years. By the way, I really liked Alex's presentation. I hope, I think we have some contrast there. I'm not that optimistic about the climate change, but we see how it goes.
I'll share some of mine.
Good. Anyway, over the last roughly about 20 years, we developed, we've been using a lot of the emission energy data, and the first, when I was a PhD student, I was the first thing to excited about is search online, you see, oh, there's any data, or search in the libraries, any data available. So over the years, we accumulated a lot of emission data, especially for China and other developing countries. So about 2016, we decided to put what we have online, fully transparent, fully freely for all the academic purposes. So we set up data sets called the China Emission Account and Data Sets. It's a seeds.net. Currently, most of the data are the Chinese national, regional, and city level data. They consist of energy inventories for the national level, 30 provinces, and roughly about 200 cities in China. And accounting by a slightly different, a different approach, a different methodology. It tells you which methodology it is. One is from more energy supply perspective. The other is more from the energy consumption perspective. So it's different methodologies. Each of the inventories in the data sets has consistent sectors. So it has 47 socio-economic sectors multiplied by 20 different energy types. So it doesn't matter it's a national level or provincial level or the city level, they all have the same format. So basically we're following the same statistical approach to develop the emissions. And they are time series. For the national and the provincial level, we have the data from 1997 to 2016. It's all freely download. And for the cities, right now we shared openly for 1 year, but in the next couple months we did it for 10 years for roughly about 200 cities of the each cities in China. And I tell you a little bit more about how we did that. So basically, as by using same statistical approach to do it, the energy sources we try to be consistent between the national, provincial, and the city level. So therefore, they are comparable and fully transparent, and it's free. It's for the formatting is also the same. So it's a little bit of science behind this data set. So basically, coal is aggregation. It's aggregate term. It's nothing in the world is actually called coal. It's like a curry. You go to an Indian restaurant, then you ask for, oh, I want a curry, so they will basically, say, throw you out. Or you just like you go to a coffee house in Austria, then okay, you want a coffee, and then the waiter will say, okay, go out, get out. So it's a different type of the coals. So for the category, for different categories, different countries slightly different, but largely they are pretty much the same if you really rank it by the heat values and the carbon contents. In China, it has like 18 different type of coals. So depending on the quality, the carbon content, etc. So very typical example, the shining coal down here have more carbon content compared to the like a loose, not very much a good quality coal. Have a very small amount of carbon content. But when you do the statistics, it doesn't matter if it's China, India, or US. You actually just aggregate them up. So you just sum them up. It's just like adding an orange and an apple together. In the international kind of UN, FCCC or whatever, the IPCC, they all have default kind of emission factors for coal for different countries, of course. So it doesn't take the quality variation of the fuels into considerations when they construct or when they develop the emission inventories. So we work between myself, also Zhu there, and we work with the Chinese Climate Sciences. Last, when was it? 2011, I think. And not basically us, a lot of researchers in China surveyed roughly about 4,000 coal mines in China. It cost China about 800 million Chinese yuan, Chinese money, to do this sort of survey and take about 600 different type of coals into lab and the burn rate test, etc., etc. So they get the variation, the quality variation of the coal. So we come up with a new estimate compared to many, kind of the international data publishers for the emissions. So the red line, the right curve is our new estimations compared to CDAC, which is a US, carbon dioxide information analysis center, compared to Europe, EDGA database. So it's about 9 to 14% of differences in terms of the emission, the estimation of the for the Chinese kind of emissions. And because of the, there's like everywhere, the coal mines, so we were able to kind of tackle the coal mines with the regional basis as well. So this is actually quite, 9 to 14%. Isn't, well, sounds okay, well, it's 15%. But China is the largest emitter in the world. That's actually about 1.5 gigatons per year, roughly, for the variation. So let's say call it uncertainties, and some people will say call it error. So cumulatively, over the last about 15 years, that's about 10 gigatons of CO2 emissions are sort of overestimated in the things. Why this sort of work is important? Because China is a country which actually has some quite good statistical systems compared to many other developing countries. And Indonesia, Vietnam, India, they all have a more or less robust statistical systems than China does. So the quality, and they are all in the major coal burners in the world. So, so to have a better, accurate accounting for the emissions is quite important for not only the science, but also for the achieving the climate targets. So we have this data sets. We've done quite a bit analysis by using the data sets. So one of the analysis we published last year was basically saying, okay, China is actually over the last whatever years emission rapid increase, but they actually reach a sort of a peak in 2013. We never claim this is a final peak, but this is at least a kind of a temporary peak. It's 9.5 gigatons in 2013, and gradually going down a little bit, over the last few years. But on the other hand, the Chinese economy is actually still continue growth, not as fast as the double digits anymore, but it's still roughly about 7% per year for the GDP growth. So that is actually, GDP is growth and the emission is going down. It's sort of, so we come up with this question whether the Chinese emissions is actually, the Chinese growth is actually decoupling with the emissions. So we investigate why it's like that. So firstly, the Chinese coal consumptions is actually reaching a peak in recent years in 2013, 12, 13, and actually had a quite a significant decline over the last number of years. But it's not necessarily Chinese overall energy consumption is declining. It's actually Chinese energy consumption is stably going up, but rapidly the gap is being replaced by natural gas and the renewable energy. In Chinese, we call the low carbon fuels, basically, or low carbon energies. We all did some, econometric statistics to see whether it's statistically significant or etc. Right, I think it's too complicated. I don't have how much time I have? Yeah, I know, but I have quite a lot to show. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's come up with a question, so we can explain that. So on the so that was a sort of the national level, and so we, as I said, the data set has a regional 30 provinces data time series as well. So take one particular year there is basically show the per capita CO2 emissions between the different provinces. Conventionally is a per capita emission higher, where your economic prosperity is higher. Like say Beijing, Shanghai, they usually have a per capita emissions much higher than the lag behind regions. But in China, it's slightly different stories. Some lag behind, some poorer regions like Inner Mongolia and Ningxia are the highest in terms of per capita emissions. The reason is that they have a very, let's say, high efficient, high energy intensive industry park kind of things. So what does that? So they have coal resources, so they dig it out and they sell it on for cash. If they can't sell it on, then they burn it for electricity. Then sell it on again. So if it's not, the electricity won't be sold, then they will use that to process aluminium, steel, or all kind of metals. So it's quite efficient from the circular economy perspective, but it's a very high kind of energy intensive for that particular region. So they gave the lag behind economically lag behind regions are very high per capita emissions. So this is the regional kind of database. After that, so we start to think what will be the next generation data will be like for climate change data, not only the carbon but also other things. And we also want to understand, actually, if you go on any data, there was references from all the keynote speakers and Alex there. It's all like IEA or whatever says, but nobody or very few people would think, where their data come from, and then do they ever check, how they get the data? Well, we just use and put a reference IEA 2016 or whatsoever. So to us, to me, it's a black box. So what we did is that we organized a small conference, and then we invite the key people, the key data publishers, to Norwich, actually, in England, and so we asked the really talk about their methodologies and where on the data sources for them. And turns out the three major emission data publishers, they all have the same source for activity data. So it's all from the United Nations, countries and reports, everything. The only thing is that they have a different energy, what they call the emission factors. So for the CDIEC, for example, they have a default US average. And for different countries like China, India, they will multiply our different parameters for that. Where the parameter come from, then there's nobody knows. And EDGA is actually more based on the European average. And the IEA, they actually have a few countries, a number of countries are real sort of surveyed data for the energy resources. We organized a special issue actually in the applied energy, and there's a published methodology for each of those data sets. Yeah. Well, also we say what can we do for the futures, and by using carbon satellites or other like monitoring things, and how we could make the next generation data better. Because only when the data is better, then any climate policy or any energy policy we're in place, it won't be a number crunching game. Otherwise, it will be just play doll for politicians. So on the workshop, also the years of work, we realized. Well, I always think the climate change policies or target, whatever agreed in the cabinet or in parliament or Congress or whatsoever it doesn't happen there. It's not like a few people's, 100, whatever, 90 countries leader agree something on that will naturally happen. They won't. They will. What's the basic unit would make it happen? From my perspective, will be on the cities. It's a city level and then down to each power plants and the factories, their willingness, their actions, their implementations for whatever they call it. But unfortunately, very few cities, including US, Europe, Japan, very, very few cities, they have a complete emission inventories in the world. As include the LA, Washington, New York, whatever, none of them have their own kind of emission inventories for that. Neither of China does either. So, China, a couple of cities they have. Similarly, like in London, they has. I'm not sure about New York, but maybe a couple of cities in the U.S. it has. But majority of the cities, it doesn't have a complete the emission inventories. So those basic research, basic work is require. Lots of it's nothing difficult. It's just the very, let's say, labor and the time-consuming work. So the basic informations are there, and it's just we get there. So we started to using a way what I called I didn't put it here. What I call crowdsourcing for data. It's not cross-sourcing for money, but cross-sourcing for data. So we on the sort of a daily basis, we have less than 100 people working for us. So we start with China. So we did about almost 200 cities, 180 cities in China for the emission accounts. Then we write the methodologies, both in English and then Chinese, and the manual, and also an online calculator for doing that. So whoever are interested on this, they could just follow the step-by-step guidance online and to do that. And then we eventually the raw data were put into the calculator and come up with emission inventories for a city. So when you are have a large city for like say almost 200 countries, 200 cities of the data, you have many things. It's especially a large country like China, and also in the U.S. is quite interesting. This is just pure per capita carbon emissions for each cities in China, and for each cities you actually can get at least 3 of the graphs about what's their energy patterns, which sectors they are contributing the most of the emissions. And then for the energy, etc., which is the most important sectors consuming energies, etc. But when you have that, you can do a little bit more studies and more like a research on this. So also last year we published this, and so basically I was using 1 year like a static kind of a graph for about 180 cities, but break the Chinese cities by different industrialization stages. So you have a red, which is what we call the energy production cities at the early stage of industrialization, low value-added heavy manufacturing, so like a process of aluminiums, etc. Low value-added light manufacturers, high-tech, cities, and post-industrialized cities. So in these graph is actually, I can use a sort of use spatial to change time to really to reflect how the 250 years industrialization were processed, were developed. So because you got all type of a city here. For the people, I think the Chinese are fine, but for people who don't know China very much, so I highlight the 3 regions here, which are the 3 major Chinese economic engines there. So around Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, the places. So if we take one particular places like, Alex has great interest on the Yangtze River, right? So let's take Shanghai as an example. So surrounding Shanghai, there's lots of light-colored cities, which is a more developed, more industrialized cities. But if you just, beyond the box and just look a little bit outside, then you see a number of dark-sided cities surrounding that, providing energy, materials, etc., for their prosperities. Well, no need to mention about Beijing. So for Beijing's kind of consumption of the prosperities, huge amount of cities surrounding Beijing or just a little bit outside of Beijing providing energies and then other things for that. So that is actually trigger us a question. So we call it low carbon development. What is low carbon development? Is a low carbon or is a lower carbon development? Should it be one? Well, so basically, the low carbon is an absolute term or is a relative term. You should have one unique definition about every city should have a low carbon development as a one target, or should it be different? So so right now, it doesn't matter which countries, it's all same to have a top-down climate policies. So they all have a same low carbon development kind of goals. So it's all top-down levels. But by doing that top-down, you kind of sort of ignore the regional differences and the differences between, especially on the industrialization stages. They are at different stages of industrializations. Therefore, their industry patterns, etc., are all different. So, so you basically put into a more extreme kind of case. You're actually asking one of the red cities, like say Pingdingshan, which is a coal mining cities, overnight change to Shanghai. So that is basically the policy ask. So we think is how about we're not from the top down, we are from bottom up approach. It's like a cross-sourcing data, but it's actually cross-sourcing what we call super pollution unit. So it's basically, it doesn't matter. So for the equity and then all the costs of whatever, employment, etc., if you identify like the top 100 most dirty industries in the countries, that pretty much is all here. But if you like deal with that, all deal with the red cities, it will cause millions of people unemployed. There's many social problems, and that will be interesting to see that safe index, how this look for that. But even for the Shanghai and Beijing, the cities who are more like advanced, but comparatively speaking, compared with themselves, they have something below their average. So if every cities in China and eventually in the world to donate the most dirty top 5% of the super pollution units within their boundaries, and the emission kind of reduction will be much more effective. So for China, we calculate if every Chinese city donate 5% of what they call the super pollution unit, then the emissions will be achieve 30% reductions rather than top down. They only ask for 50% efficiency achievement by whatever 2030, 2035, which is cause lots of local problem as well. So put in that way is actually okay. Lots of if all the cities, well, not say all city, top 50, 100 world cities work together from bottom-up approach to agree something similar like the Paris Agreement, the mini Paris Agreement for the city levels, that would trigger a lot of cascading effects through the international communities. Okay, well, I try to run through. So it's another kind of the advertisement. So I'm organizing a big, it's a Chinese, organizing a big data forum in Cambridge in England, and on the 1st and the 5th of October. So if anybody is interested on the big data, then they can come over here. I only have a few minutes. I will just run through this quickly. So if well, this is all about the cities, but let's take a look at what's happening globally. Over the last number of years, the emission globally has been increased quite rapidly. But good news is that in 2015, the global emissions actually stabilized. It's actually declined a little bit by less than 1%. In 2016, it's stabilized, it's 0.2%, something like that. So it's, in the recent years, the global emissions are actually stabilizing. But does it, well, the contribution for that is because of Chinese decline of coal consumptions and use of lots of renewable energy, etc. But does this automatics? This is what my question is to Alex, basically. But if we look at the 2015 figure, is here. But this is the full projections is basically, the IPCC's RCP scenarios. I guess people wouldn't know that. But if we want to achieve, like say, 2 degrees C, we are actually a lot higher, or at least an equivalent kind of a figure in 2015 compared to the level of the 2 degrees C's requirement in one of the simulations in 2020. So at least we, over 5 years, we consume the carbon space 5 years in advance than that. And so carbon accounting on the globally, so this is the amount of the emissions we can inject to the atmosphere by end of the century to keep 2 degrees C's. And this is the damage already made. Unless there's a geoengineering project, etc., then we're very unlikely to take it out. This is the amount we need to, we have the carbon space to end of the century. And the question now is who get this space and whether it's fair to do so. So if we just take the first, this is 2 degrees C, so this is the amount of the carbon space is there. Let's not take everyone take into consideration, just the 4 major players in the world: US, EU, India, and China. Without any further kind of like a very complicated modeling, just graph through. Let's see what happens in the last. EU and the US will possibly gradually decline their emissions. We put Trump in a question mark here, but nevertheless, this is going to be sort of declining if we, according to the business euro. China would need so much if we say that. And the Indian, we haven't really taken account of a double digit of emission growth, largely powered by the coal fire plants are there. So this is much left. And who get this much? Is it Africa? Or is others like India and China? So really, I think what's the solution for that? Last few slides. So all the emissions accounts I talk about is all from the production side. But if we look at from consumption side, they give you very similar examples. If you leave the emission out for a little while, just talk about toy. For a little while, for fun. So on the left-hand side is a world production of toy. On the right side is a world consumption for toys. And so one day we want to say, if we want to reduce the toy consumptions, whose responsibility? Is it producers or is it consumers? And the producers are really for the toys are China and South Asia. And the consumers are really Europe and then here in the US. I skip that. Okay, just so 2, 1 plus another one. So so the country level. So every year almost this is one of the IPCC figure we contribute. About 1/3 of the emissions China produce is actually for export productions. That 1/3 is actually mostly goes to US, EU, and Japan. But in recent years, it's changed a little bit. So global south, so between developing countries, the trade is actually going up very quickly. So China actually going up 50% of the embodied emission in Chinese export because of trade with India, Latin American countries, and then Africa. Similarly, India does the same. So it's really about the future of the climate change mitigations is in hands of global developing countries cooperation together. U.S. still play big, but in the Europe, like say I'm from the UK, UK contribute 1% of global emissions world, but consumption-wise is 10%. So really, how the small country in terms of the emissions in UK citizens are able to contribute to climate change mitigations is really much from the consumption side to look into that, because we have 1.3 billion Chinese, almost 1.3 billion Indians there, and 2.5 billion Indian Chinese are learning from Americans' lifestyles, and the world can't afford that. It's simple as that. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for the time.
Okay, question?
Yeah.
So, in your opinion or experience, what are a good set of metrics you would want to use to down select the targets, the cities, the communities, the countries, who should be assigned portions of reduction for carbon emissions?
Well, there's a few things. So it's productions on. We are still globally we still are relying on many developing countries' productions for our consumptions, and to make that production more efficient, or like in other way, so what we call the lower emission carbon emission development, then we need technologies. Technologies is to increase the efficiency, also improve the energy patterns, like energy mix, like the wind power, etc. And that's this for. And I hope those technologies won't just stuck in MIT's lab, but it's actually gonna be implemented in the many developing countries, on sites. So this is from production side. From the consumption side, is the people who live in the UK and the US, how we could help. The US now contribute less than roughly about 10% of global emissions now, but they consumes about 25 or 28% of global overall emissions. Each of the Americans or each of the UK citizens, how to change the green consumption as a fashion, because the fashion right now in the fashion industry is about maybe fast fashion. Maybe I'm not up to date. Maybe girls will know better. So you buy your jumper or your scarf like maybe every week or every 2 weeks, then you throw it away or something like that. So this is the fast fashion is not a good way as how to make a green consumption as a fashion. The importance is not only for the US and the UK to reduce carbon footprint, but also is to help the 2.5 billion Indian Chinese getting rich quickly to sort of have an opportunity to leapfrog to a more greener.
So in that case, like CO2 emission per capita doesn't really make too much sense.
From production side, is CO2 per capita, but from the consumption side, we call it footprint, so how much damage you make, basically. It's two different indicators, but on the different things, you represent a slightly different thing. But from consumption side, the footprints, that definitely is that. Yeah.
But exporting your dirty manufacturing to another place doesn't absolve you from bearing credit for wrecking things.
And talking about this, about the footprint, I'd like to ask you about your database. You said you developed the database of the inventories and the assessment for different cities. How do you set the city boundaries in terms of the emissions? Also aligned with this idea of the important.
So the city boundaries right now, Because firstly, I'm an economist, so I have to have where the data are available. So most of the data, complete data available as admin regions, so administrative regions. The city here we talk about in China is not means the built-up cities we talk about in the West. It's actually the including both built-up areas and the rural areas. Sorry, in Chinese city side. We haven't been able to, this is our next step, to separate within one like a grade, you separate, this is the built-up area, this is rural areas. We haven't been able to do that. By doing that, we could really able to tackle the population living in the built-up areas and the rural areas to see their carbon footprint differences.
That was not actually I was after.
Okay.
Because in the same way as we don't have a very good system at national level, where we have the national inventories, the Paris Agreement on the national inventories, but we have this problem about importing, exporting.
Oh yes,
yeah?
yes.
And so the city will be the same.
Yes.
When you do the inventory for the city, you also see the city, how you mine inside the city, or how you bring, for example, the energy or the environmental impacts into the consumption.
That's for the energy sectors. We were able to do that because once we have the energy balance sheet, you know where your energy come from. Or if you're exporting cities, you know where your energy goes from. Well, you know, each, like say, area, you have a few key, like coal mining plants, and then you know where they come from. The data is supporting that. And that's why we rely on the detailed inventory for the coal mines. But also you have the statistics says where your how much you imported for what industries for well, not for 20 different energy types. Most of the time for coal, oil, gas. That's for the city level. At least in China side, they has such statistics. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to close and move on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.